Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your curiosity and the source materials you send us and really concentrate them down into knowledge.
That's right. Especially for you, the learner. You're looking for that quick but still deep understanding, maybe different viewpoints, those aha moments, without getting totally swamped by information.
Exactly. And today we've got a really fascinating exploration ahead.
Yeah, you sent over a YouTube transcript. It's an interview with Mark Van Buren from Holland Gold talking to another Mark Van Buren, someone who's living this very self-sufficient life.
Okay.
So our mission really is to unpack his motivations, the actual practices, the philosophy behind it all.
Right. And pull out those key insights for you so you can get up to speed on this whole topic quickly and thoroughly.
Precisely.
Okay, let's dive in then. This Mark Van Buren, the one being interviewed, who is he exactly? Give us the basics.
Okay, so he's 56, father of 6, grandfather of 8, and he's living with, get this, 15 family members.
15?
Yeah, 3 generations, all on about 2 hectares of land in a place called Birkwood.
And his background, is he like from a farming family or something?
Not at all, actually. That's what's interesting. For 25 years, he was deep in the tech world, communication, HR, technology, ran his own business, even had data centers, software development.
So quite the career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He sold the company back in 2019, now semi-retired. So maybe the first takeaway for you listening is, this path isn't just for people with a certain background. It can be a very conscious choice later on.
A tech guy gone rural. Okay, so what prompted that? Such a massive life change.
Well, the seeds were planted about 15 years ago, apparently. He talks about these family backpacking trips to the Arctic.
The Arctic? Seriously?
Yeah, imagine that, swapping IT infrastructure for icy landscapes.
Yeah.
Those trips, he says, taught them they really didn't need much stuff to be happy. And it really drove home the value of just living life together as a family. So for you, the learner, maybe it shows how sometimes, these really unexpected experiences can shift your whole perspective on what matters.
Wow. Arctic simplicity versus HR tech complexity. That's quite a contrast. So family was a huge piece, clearly. Any other driving forces?
Oh, definitely. He started looking critically at modern society, seeing it as fragile. He calls it a highly optimized but very vulnerable domino race.
A domino race, I can see that. Everything's so connected.
Exactly. He worried that if one piece fails, the whole thing could just tumble.
Yeah.
So that led to this desire for something more robust, less vulnerable, for his family.
Makes sense. Protecting the family unit.
Yeah. And that insight, that recognition of systemic risk and then actually doing something about it personally, that's pretty key here.
Were there hints of this thinking earlier on before the Arctic trips really clicked?
Interestingly, yes. Even in their previous house, which was apparently in a flood-prone area, they already had, emergency blankets, a rubber boat, that kind of thing.
Okay, so preparedness was already on his mind.
It was. But what's telling is he felt he couldn't really talk about these worries openly. People found it too unsettling, maybe. Didn't want to think about it.
Yeah, I get that feeling of unease you can't quite voice. Did any real-world events kind of crystallize this view for him?
Yeah, he mentions a couple. The big blackout in Spain and Portugal really brought home the grid's fragility.
Right.
And the Suez Canal blockage. That just showed how easily global supply chains can be disrupted by, one stuck ship.
True. Huge impacts from single events.
So for you, the learner, these are examples of how actual disruptions can be real wake-up calls, making you reconsider just how much we rely on these big, complex systems.
Okay, so the concern grew, the vision formed. How did they actually make the leap? Going from concern to, 2 hectares and 15 people. It's huge.
It is. The move to Birkwood started about 10 years back. Took them 2 years to find the right place. He even says finding it felt a bit accidental, serendipitous. They were maybe considering Eastern Netherlands, too. Budget was around 800K euros, significant, but maybe not astronomical for that kind of project.
Yeah, not unlimited funds.
No. They found this large house, initially on 1 hectare. They expanded later. It fit the budget and, crucially, could house 12 people initially, with enough space for some privacy.
So pooling resources made it possible.
Exactly. That seems to be a recurring theme.
12 people under one roof initially. Must have been interesting. What was that like?
He highlights the good stuff, really strong family bonds forming, shared life, shared work,
Sure.
but also inevitably minor friction. Trivial things, whose turn it is, car lights left on, disagreements over land use, should this be hayfield or pasture. Small stuff, but amplified.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so after about 6 years, they started creating more separate living spaces on the property. And that period, that's when they shifted from just like stockpiling supplies preparedness to really building this integrated cyclical existence.
Cyclical. Oh, okay. Explain that. Not just storing stuff, but...
But creating systems that regenerate, so their own fresh water from a well, producing their own food, meat, vegetables. It wasn't about having a doomsday bunker full of cans.
Gotcha.
It was about designing sustainable, ongoing systems, which is a really interesting distinction, I think.
Definitely. Let's break that down. The cyclical lifestyle.
Right.
Water, first, that's fundamental. How'd they manage that?
Right. Water. They have their own well, goes down 50 meters deep.
Okay.
And it feeds into this pretty sophisticated filtration setup, reverse osmosis, then remineralization to add back minerals.
So high-quality drinking water.
Very. And the scale is impressive. It can produce thousands of liters a day. Way more than they need for drinking, cooking, washing, gardens, everything.
Wow. And does he use much rainwater?
Surprisingly little, he says. Just a small fraction of what falls on their land. The initial cost was significant, though maybe $25,000 to $30,000.
Okay, a real investment.
Yeah, and the filtering uses power, about 6-7 kilowatt hours per 1,000 liters. So the takeaway for you. Real water independence is possible, but it takes serious investment in the tech.
Basically their own private waterworks.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, food? That seems way more complicated.
Yeah.
Are they, like, growing wheat and milling flour?
Total food independence?
They aim for nutritional self-sufficiency, but they're pragmatic. They still buy things like pasta, rice, grains.
Okay, why?
Several reasons. Variety, obviously. Also, those staples store really well in bulk for long periods. Just personal preference, you know?
Sure.
But, and this is key, he stresses, they could live entirely off the land if they absolutely had to. They'd adapt, maybe swap coffee for fruit juice, things like that. And they do a lot of preserving, canning, etc.
So a practical balance. Strive for self-sufficiency, but use the system where it makes sense.
Exactly. It's not dogmatic. What about protein? That's always a big one in self-sufficiency talks. Animals.
Yep. Raising animals is key. They have pigs, he mentioned, having some about 5 months old, 90 kilos, aiming for 120, 150 kilos at slaughter. Usually raise about 3 pigs. Chickens, too. But they manage the flock size seasonally, reducing it in winter to cut down on feed costs.
All right.
And interestingly, their sons-in-law hunt. So they bring in geese, deer, wild boar. That gets integrated, made into burgers, sausages.
Diversifying protein sources.
Yeah. He does mention getting eggs year-round without extra feed is a challenge, and they handle their own poultry processing on-site.
Okay, quite involved. From well water to home-raised pork and hunted game. That covers basics. What about power? Modern essential. Are they totally off-grid?
Mostly, yeah. They have a massive solar panel setup. On a good day, it can generate around 500 kilowatt hours.
500. Compared to a normal house with panels.
Which might generate, what, 8 or 10 kilowatt hours? It's a huge difference.
Definitely. And storage, batteries.
Oh, yeah. 120 kilowatt hours in fixed batteries. Plus, their electric cars are bidirectional, so they can pull another 80 kilowatt hours from the car batteries as needed.
Cars powering the house. Cool tech. Still connected to the grid at all.
They have one connection left, mainly for net metering selling excess power back. But they plan to phase that out, and they use another connection with the dynamic contract. Basically, they buy power or charge the EVs when prices are super low, sometimes even negative. Smart energy trading.
That's sophisticated, very proactive energy management. But winter, less sun, heating needs.
Yeah.
How do they cope then?
That's the big challenge, he admits. Heating is mostly wood burning, which uses very little electricity just for pumps.
Right.
They really watch their electricity use in winter. EV charging is limited. They do have a diesel generator as a fallback.
It's backup plan.
Yeah, but they prefer the cyclical, sustainable options first.
Oh, yeah.
It really highlights that you need diverse sources and you have to adapt your usage, especially off-grid.
Makes sense. Solar, batteries, wood, careful usage. Okay, another modern must-have. Internet and tech. Did the former tech entrepreneur ditch all that?
No way. They've built redundant systems that work without the public internet. It's pretty impressive.
Like an internal network.
Exactly. He calls it their mini data center. Running Kubernetes, which is, pretty advanced stuff for managing internal systems. Reliable, flexible.
Yeah.
It hosts local copies of resources, wikis. They're even playing with local AI, something called notebooklm, energy management, security, all on the local network.
And backup for external connection.
Yep. Satellite internet, just in case. So for you listening, tech self-reliance is clearly a big part of their overall resilience strategy, too.
Localized digital infrastructure. Very forward-thinking. Okay, this paints a picture of incredible practical self-sufficiency. What about his wider views? Does he see this family commune as like a model for society?
He definitely thinks the modern way, very individualistic, isn't very robust. He's a big advocate for extended families living together.
Why? What are the benefits he sees?
Mutual support, basically, especially for things like childcare or caring for people when they're sick or elderly, practical stuff.
Makes sense.
And huge financial benefits. Fewer mortgages, sharing cars, internet, buying food in bulk, lower insurance. Plus, multiple incomes supporting one household gives a lot more flexibility.
Challenges that idea of needing your own separate everything.
Absolutely. It suggests community bonds are a core part of resilience, maybe more than we typically think.
But what about the downsides people imagine with multi-generational living? Needing space, independence for personal growth.
He pushes back on that. He thinks it's a misunderstanding. He argues that taking responsibility within a community actually fosters better growth, gives a stronger sense of purpose.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah, he even shares a story about his mother-in-law living with them happily for long periods. And he tackles the, well, you have 2 hectares argument.
Right, that it's only possible with lots of land.
He points out they started with just 1 hectare and a mortgage. He emphasizes the financial power of sharing, even without vast acreage.
So it's the collective approach, not just the land size. How do they handle money within the group? Everyone chip in equally.
It's more based on ability to pay. So people earning less contribute less, but everyone benefits from the lower overall living costs.
Okay, flexible.
They have a central pot for shared household stuff. And then his company, the BV, handles the big infrastructure investments, solar, and invoices the household for usage. So it's structured.
A mini economy within the family. Clever.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Spain blackout earlier. Let's circle back to his views on wider societal resilience, especially for the Netherlands.
Right. He talks about grid instability, how frequency changes can cause that domino effect leading to blackouts.
And he thinks it's likely in the Netherlands.
He predicts it's 100% going to happen eventually, and maybe a 50–80% chance in the coming years, which is stark.
Wow. Does he base that on anything specific?
He mentions there are already around 27,000 power outages a year in the Netherlands. Apparently, many go unreported, so the system isn't perfectly stable now.
27,000. That's a lot higher than I'd have guessed.
Yeah. He was actually surprised how quickly Spain got their grid back up, but thinks their reliance on gas power for the black start helped.
So what's his advice for Dutch energy security then?
He argues for a really mixed approach. Definitely nuclear. He likes the idea of smaller distributed plants, but also keep the existing gas and coal plants available alongside renewables.
For stability.
Exactly, for grid stability and backup. He's not against renewables, obviously. Look at his solar setup, but he stresses needing smart integration and redundancy. He questions relying solely on solar, especially in Dutch winters.
A pragmatic mix, not just all in on one technology.
Precisely. Balance and realism seem key to his thinking there.
Okay, beyond energy,
Yeah.
What about water security for everyone else, not just on his homestead? Any simple advice?
Yeah, very practical stuff. Store bottled water and make sure to rotate it, keep it fresh,
Simple enough.
and get a good water filter. He mentions life straw as effective for making surface water, like from a canal, safe from pathogens in an emergency.
Even if it has chemicals.
His point is, in a real crisis, the risk of dehydration or getting sick from bacteria is way higher than minor chemical contamination from a temporary source.
Yes.
Prioritize immediate survival needs.
Good point. Practical advice. And internet resilience for the average person. Any thoughts beyond his own setup?
He really emphasizes not being totally dependent on cloud services for critical things. His own internal network shows essential stuff can run locally.
But updates. Security.
That's the catch. He acknowledges software updates often need that external connection. So there's a tension there, independence versus staying current and secure.
A tricky balance in the digital age. Okay, let's shift to financial resilience. Beyond his own land and systems, how does he approach that?
Well, first, he sees the self-sufficiency itself as a huge asset, right? Reduced expenses, tangible resources.
Sure, that makes sense.
But beyond that, a lot of their wealth is in real estate, the homestead, plus another property in Belgium. Smaller, less developed, but a potential fallback with basic self-sufficiency elements.
Diversifying location, too.
Yeah. And tangible assets, farmland. Woodland in Belgium for timber. Plus, physical precious metals, gold and silver.
Physical metals,
Way.
not just paper assets.
Right. And he keeps some personally accessible, just in case payment systems go down. He also keeps a good amount of cash on hand, several months' worth, though he needs less cash on the homestead itself.
The cash still matters then.
He thinks so. He mentioned how useful it was during the Spanish blackout, and he likes using cash locally to support that infrastructure.
Interesting. What about crypto? Bitcoin.
He was an early adopter, sees it mainly as an alternative payment method, not just speculation, uses Bitcoin debit cards sometimes.
So overall, very diversified. Real estate, land, metals, cash, some crypto, spreading the risk.
Exactly, across asset classes and even locations.
Seems like a core principle for him. Diversification for resilience. Does he have, like, a plan C? What if things got really bad societally?
He definitely wants to stay in the Netherlands, but he has triggers that might make them leave. Extreme policies, he mentioned, like maybe crippling inheritance taxes under certain political shifts, that would make their family life impossible.
Okay, red lines.
Yeah. And any decision to leave would be collective, the whole family. On conscription, he's not against it. In principle, he worked with defense before.
Right.
But he'd oppose being drafted for what he sees as pointless foreign wars. He questions the whole definition of national borders in a Brussels-led context now.
Complex issues. What about securing the homestead itself?
Natural defenses moats around the property. Location helps the Krimpener ward, he thinks, isn't a prime target for looting. And crucially, the community aspect. Like-minded neighbors willing to defend themselves.
Community as security again. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he thinking about scaling this beyond his family? Bigger communities?
He's open to it, maybe acquiring larger estates with other like-minded people. He seems inspired by some intentional communities, groups that are highly self-governing.
Like the Hutterites, maybe?
He didn't name them, but the description fits that kind of model. High self-governance. But he's realistic about the hurdles in the Netherlands bureaucracy as a killer. He mentioned a long legal fight just over planting trees.
Oh, red tape.
Yeah. And one of his kids is actually planning a move to Paraguay.
Really? Joining an existing community there?
No, forging their own path, apparently. Aware of the sacrifices, they have a contact there via the GRIP network for maybe some soft landing support if needed, but independence is the goal.
Interesting. That GRIP network sounds relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, what about local versus global? He's focused locally, but how does he see trade? Build walls or cooperate?
He really values local economies, bartering with neighbors, like getting milk from a local farmer. He believes in specialization and trade regionally where it makes sense.
Supporting local producers.
Yeah, willing to pay more for local grain, for example. His view on import tariffs is nuanced.
How so?
He sees they can be disruptive short-term, obviously, but may be necessary sometimes to rebuild local industries, bring back skills, reduce reliance on fragile global chains.
A potential reset for local economies.
Kind of. He thinks it could ultimately benefit domestic production, even if it causes trade friction. He remembers when the Netherlands had thriving local industries.
A push for relocalization, maybe with some protectionism. Okay, last area. What about common objections people have? The I could never do that arguments. How does he respond?
He hears three main ones, calls them more like excuses, really. First, I don't know enough people.
Right, finding the community.
His answer, you have to actively look for like-minded people, share the vision, be willing to give and take, make agreements, and he mentions networks like GRIP again.
Okay, be proactive. What's number two?
I don't have the money.
The big one for many.
He suggests things like multifamily mortgages, maybe selling expensive city property to buy cheaper rural land, or just starting small. Community garden, balcony garden, baby steps.
Lower the barrier to entry. And the third?
I don't have the skills, I'm just an office worker.
The practical know-how gap.
He points to their own journey. They weren't farmers, they learned. He questions the value of some modern jobs, bullshit jobs, he calls them, compared to fulfilling practical skills. He says, find your passion, learn, grow.
So focus on solutions, mindset shifts, taking first steps. Makes sense? Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. Covered a lot of ground there.
For sure. We went through his motivations family, societal worries, the practical side water, food, energy, tech, the community focus, and his critical but pragmatic worldview.
Yeah. Hopefully for you, the learner, that delivered on that promise, quick but thorough understanding of a really complex way of life.
Yeah, some surprising bits like the scale of their energy setup, hopefully some aha moments about what's possible, what resilience can look like.
Right. We try to give you the different angles, the challenges, the rewards, without it feeling overwhelming.
And if this has sparked your interest, that GRIP network Mark Van Buren mentioned, greksp.it, that's greksp.itt, sounds like a good resource.
Connecting like-minded people interested in self-reliance.
Exactly. And they're doing an event with Holland Gold June 6th in Brooklyn. We'll put the details in the show notes if you want to check that out.
Definitely check the show notes for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap up, a final thought for you to chew on.
Yeah, building on all this, what's maybe one small concrete step you could take starting now towards a bit more self-reliance or maybe stronger community connection in your own life?
Could be tiny. Starting herbs on the windowsill. Finally introducing yourself to the neighbors next door. What would that first step look like for you? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.